and have been working with people who join me on the panel today. Simon Dent from Althelia Mirova, Daniela Cedola from PwC in Luxembourg, and Jodi Smith from Matanataki in Fiji. And I'm going to give each of them a chance to introduce themselves and speak a little bit about their current activity and the companies that they represent. And then we're going to dive into the discussion proper. So over to you, Simon.
Thank you, Greg. So good morning, everybody. So I'm Simon Dent, and I'm founder and principal around the Sustainable Ocean Fund, which is managed by Mirova Natural Capital. Mirova is an investment manager with over $8 billion of capital dedicated to sustainable investment. So I'm a reformed investment banker. Basically, I decided that once I finished a career in commodities, that I need to think about what I can do in terms of nature. And having grown up in New Zealand, living off the beach and close to the water and fishing and sailing, I realized that basically the capital that was being invested into the ocean was a tiny fraction of what was making it into other natural capital investments such as agriculture and forestry. And the oceans are an undervalued natural asset. Oceans cover 70% of our planet. They govern the weather, they clean our air, they help feed more than 3 billion people, and they provide a living for millions. But importantly, they're also home to most of the life on Earth, from microscopic algae right through to the blue whale. And for a sustainable planet to exist, we have to have a healthy ocean. So for that reason, since really 2016, we've been working on the Sustainable Ocean Fund. And we've worked with like-minded partners to demonstrate that there are investable opportunities in the blue economy. So the fund today has deployed more than $70 million and is working with both development banks and large investors to show that there's an increasing appetite for the blue economy. And broadly, we invest into three areas: sustainable seafood, which is really best practice aquaculture, best practice wild capture fisheries, and the supply chains that relate to those businesses. The circular economy, which is often around waste and recycle. And then really in the conservation sector, so that's ecotourism, marine protected areas, resilience, and infrastructure. And we look at all of these projects through two lenses, basically, obviously a financial lens, we're a private side fund, but importantly, through an environmental and a social impact lens, where all of our projects need to directly or indirectly improve long-term ocean health. So I can stop there as an introduction, but that's what we're trying to, or we are actually doing on the ground with the Sustainable Ocean Fund.
Great, thanks a lot, Simon. Daniela, PwC took over some of the work that we started on looking at creating an investment platform for the European Commission in the blue economy and creating an environment and an ecosystem within the member states to promote and invest in the blue economy. Tell us a little bit about your work and how that program is continuing across Europe.
Hi, Gregor. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here today to talk about the blue economy, which is a very kind of important topic, but also there is a lot going on as well in the sector. So indeed, as you mentioned, you started to work with the European Commission to define the needs for investment in the blue economy. And we as PwC have been awarded the contract actually to run this initiative to make sure it happens and it takes to the market. As introduction for myself, I've been working here at PwC as a consulting director with a specialization on SME support. So all my area of work has been focused on supporting SMEs, accelerating them, helping them to have access to markets and providing assistance for either internationalization or skills or entrepreneurship skills or market entry and commercialization. So through this capacity that we developed here to support SMEs in large scale programs, plus the fact that as PwC as a network, we have strong presence actually in the blue economy, serving clients all over Europe and globally as well. And we do have also a Maritime Center of Excellence. So through this type of experience, we then were in a position to start running the Blue Invest on behalf of the European Commission. So this project started last year. So it came indeed as what Gregor said, as a consequence of the understanding that there is a gap in investment in the blue economy, especially to SMEs. And those in the so-called valley of death, when they need an investment above 2.5 million up to 15 million euro, which is past the research phase, past the seed funds, and when companies are then to prove themselves on the market, we see that there is less investment available. But not only investment available, it is really a situation of readiness of the SMEs. And we started implementing the Blue Invest and working directly with a lot of SMEs. And this Blue Invest is a community of interest, but it also is an assistance mechanism for SMEs. And what we see with the SMEs is there is a lot of goodwill and a lot of desire to go ahead. But indeed, when it comes to pitching to investors, giving a value proposition to investors, or showing a track record on the market, a lot of the startups, a lot of the SMEs are still in need of help and more experience and more track records. What's interesting also to say about the Blue Invest is our job here is to connect a lot of the investors in the sector, but we also attract all the SMEs. And when we look at this across Europe, we are covering a very kind of varied kind of ecosystem in terms of types of businesses in the blue economy. So we have, the blue economy has several subsectors, and we have a lot of things happening in energy, in sustainability, in cleanup, in aquaculture, in underwater communication. There is a world there to be explored. So I'll stop at that for now, for the introduction, but then I would like to tell you more about what we're doing and then what we see happening with SMEs in the blue economy. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniela. Jodi, you've been developing projects specifically in Fiji, the Pacific Island area. Tell us a little bit about the work that Matanataki is doing and how that relates to the blue economy and coral restoration in the region.
Sure. Well, firstly, thanks for having me. Greetings from Fiji, Bulavanaka, everybody. So my name's Jodi Smith. I'm with Matanataki. We're a private sector company developing businesses here in Fiji. We're very much at the coalface. You can't see my table. You can see a little bit behind me. I'm surrounded by products and ideas, and we're very much hands-on with helping businesses really develop concepts and trying to get them to market and also bring investment to them. So Matanataki was formed about 2 years ago, and we came about as really a result of a program called the Great Sea Reef Resilience Program. So this is a WWF-initiated program, and the Landscape Finance Lab, which is a division of WWF Austria, they came to the Pacific, and the Great Sea Reef had been identified as one of the 50 most resilient reefs in the world. So when we are able to stabilize temperatures at 2 degrees, hopefully we can do that. The Great Sea Reef is one of the reefs most likely to survive that warming scenario. So the logic behind what we're doing is that we need to stop the anthropogenic threats to that reef in order to give it a fighting chance against global warming and ocean acidification. So we were put together. I like to use the analogy that the Landscape Finance Lab, Paul Chatterton, who runs it, he built the playground and invited several of us to come in and play. We are 4 partners, so the lab put us together. They are very much our environmental and conservation touchstone, and they provide the support around impact measurement and reporting. We have Ikigai advisors, and Anton is our finance specialist. Innovent is a third partner, and Innovent are a specialist in incubating businesses and low-income economies. Now, we saw that as actually being our biggest bottleneck and the thing where we'd need most support. and I'm the person on the ground. So my background is in business development and turnaround. I came to Fiji 8 years ago to turn around a failing agricultural business, and it was through that work that I came to working with Matanataki. So we work across a number of sectors. So the key threats that we see: overfishing. We also have waste and pollution runoff, also sedimentation, siltation, and chemical runoff. So it's very broad, but the land-based threats really are the biggest issue. Therefore, we're able to look at the following sectors. So we have waste and plastics management, regenerative agriculture, aquaculture, mariculture, tourism, low carbon transport, and sustainable forestry.
Great. Well, thanks, Jodi, Daniela, Simon, for giving us a bit of background. What I really want to talk about now is the challenges for private sector investment and the types of instruments that you might need to invest in these sectors. And a bit of background from the UNCDF side. For those who don't know, the United Nations Capital Development Fund is a sister organization to the UNDP, which has the unique ability amongst UN agencies to lend and provide guarantees to the private sector. So where this becomes useful in the blue economy is where projects are not fully commercial or the risks are too high for private sector entities to invest. Then the UNCDF can provide a line of finance which is either concessional or is taking a greater risk than the private sector would normally to crowd in private sector finance. And this is what we've been doing in the application to the Joint SDG Fund, for example, in Fiji, to allow the Joint SDG Fund to get some money funneled through the UNCDF to put into the types of projects that Matanataki, for example, would be developing. And that will allow then the major risks of those projects from a private sector point of view to be taken away, or at least to be mitigated to the extent that it's then investable by the likes of Simon's fund. So to move on then, and we obviously have a very, very short space of time, so I'll ask each of you to be quite brief. I'd wanted to ask you each to give an example of a challenge and maybe the way that you're overcoming it on a particular project or a particular investment proposition or a particular sector challenge. And starting with you, Simon, then talking about Sustainable Ocean Fund, give us maybe an example of a type of investment you would look at and what the challenges are around this investment.
Great, thank you, Greg. So yeah, look, I think in the ocean there are a number of challenges, and very quickly I think there's a perception that there aren't proper it's not an area that you can invest into, and I think that that's not true. I mean, we found a broad area of investable opportunities, and we are using some blended finance approaches. We have a guarantee from the USAID that supports some of our debt lending from the fund, but we found that creating a dedicated pool of capital to look at ocean transactions with a team that's resourced sufficiently to structure deals, that's been a very targeted approach, has worked well on the ground. And so I think in terms of one of the most challenging projects that we've been looking at recently is really marine protected areas, and where we're looking at this as a sustainable business model through monetizing user fees, so tourism who enter into the natural habitat and pay for using that type of ecosystem, and then putting that on a sustainable footing so that it can be co-managed, that the resource can be managed through science, protected through enforcement, and then basically be available both for local stakeholders, so livelihoods, for instance, from small-scale fishermen, is protected, but also that it can be funded through a business model which is using a type of ecotourism approach. And so to do that, the challenge there is really to put an economic investment into place to provide enough capital to move the project onto a sustainable footing from an economic basis as well as from an impact basis. So in many cases, move them from a grant reliance process where they're maybe taking $100,000 or $200,000 of grant on a type of annual or 2-year basis. And so what we're looking at is roughly $1 million of investment into marine protected areas in the Caribbean. We're looking at marine protected areas in the Philippines. We're looking at marine protected areas in Asia, for instance, in Cambodia, and basically setting up co-managers, providing a type of professional, dedicated staff, putting in place the best practice procedures, the charging mechanism that is clear and transparent for the operators, the tourism operators, and the hotels, and then making sure that the co-manager has the requisite type of approvals from the government or the state, and then they have the staff to manage the area, and then to look at the science, and then importantly to use it as a platform to provide incremental investment. For instance, to look at the quality of the water, the sources of where sewage and recycling can be achieved to prevent coral degradation, for instance. To look at, for instance, Jodi said plastics, and then look further up the chain to see what is actually polluting the marine protected areas that you're invested to in the beginning. So we look at it as a type of completely joined up project and approach that allows us then to look at multiple revenue sources, which equally then reinforces the project over time. We get a return, it's a debt return. We then look at the equity returns from the other projects, and that's how we can create a type of diversified portfolio for the fund, giving us the type of investment hurdles that we need.
Okay, thank you. That's really interesting. Daniela, obviously the European situation is slightly different, not coral reef restoration. There's a lot of R&D that goes on in the European market funded by some of the other programs, H2020, for example. Tell us, what are the sectors that are important now in the European Union, and what are you seeing as the major growth sectors? Maybe you can give us a couple of examples.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, well, as you know, the European Union is financing the EU Green Deal now, so that's the big topic for Europe, how we're going to do the transition to a carbon neutral continent. And obviously the blue economy has a big part to play there, because many of the projects, the business existing in the blue economy touches very closely with the sustainability dimension. So when they're looking at things like blue renewable energy, ocean, wind ocean energy, or wave energy, and so on, this is totally linked to the Green Deal, and also is an area actually that traditionally has more finance. These are projects with a huge capex, and the investment is there. The payback is turning back now. So when you're talking about ocean energy, the projects are normally well financed because of the volume. The scope we're working in terms of the Blue Invest is really to serve the ecosystem of SMEs, the startup ecosystem. As you probably know, the European Union, for example, 5 million jobs are actually dependent on the blue economy. Is only 2% of employment. If you look at other countries and in terms of share of GDP, like China and India, is much higher, but it still is quite significant and is an extremely diverse sector. So when we look in terms of the trend for investment, and our scope is mainly linked to the grants, but also to the VC, a little bit on the PE type of investment as well. What we see from the European Union, actually, and then discussing with them, is they want to get away from the grant, actually, because the grant is financing a lot of early stage, but is not creating the competitiveness you need for the SMEs actually to become more professional and flourish. Also, there is an issue that sometimes grants come with a request for guarantee, and then you have a kind of a circular effect. Well, I don't have the grant, but I don't have the guarantee because I have no finance. So you have a situation there that probably the move to equity is much more interesting for everybody. The other aspect is actually there is a trend now to go to blended finance. So you get institutions like the European Commission, the European Investment Bank, and European Investment Fund to come as the risk capital, let's say, but then you attract private investment as well in the same funds. to disburse with SMEs. So the sectors that we see, we have, for example, a pipeline of projects, right? We have on our website for Blue Invest, we publish this pipeline of companies we think are good enough to receive investment and professional enough. And the four main areas that we have in this pipeline are blue energy, but here we are talking about lower pieces of the value chain, because you also have all the infrastructure for wind offshore and wave energy, which is from big players. We have coastal and environmental protection, which links also a little bit with what Jodi is doing, and Simon, what he was mentioned, the Sustainable Fund. We have aquaculture, which is a strong sector as well for obvious reasons. And then you have blue biotechnology, which is very close to aquaculture as well, but we're talking a little bit more about systems to clean the water, to preserve the environment, and also to produce food and algae and things like that. So these are the types of projects that we see happening most. But when we look at the other piece of the puzzle of investment, which is the corporate, and what we see on the investment landscape, for instance, in the US, corporate VCs actually are about half of the investment deals nowadays, so this is going really strong. And in Europe, we're trying to kind of mobilize the corporate VCs as well in the blue economy. And then here, what we see is things more linked to shipping, because shipping is the sector where you have a lot of money already available, but then it's towards the green shipping, fuel efficiency, port cleanup, the things that can make it more efficient and cheaper, and then has a carbon reduction. And then you have things that are much more on the ICT side, so for example, communications, devices for managing ports, or devices for data analysis, space data applied to maritime, you have a number of different things. So it's very mixed, but what we see, the pillars then is the grants, the VCs, the PEs, and then the corporate investment as well are the areas where we see movement.
Great. Jodi, I'm going to hand over to you now. And Fiji is obviously a very specific example of the approach to blue economy. And the one thing that I was interested to know, because we've been working on that together, is the area that has come up again and again is waste management. And maybe you can talk a little bit about the specific projects that Matanataki has been working on in waste management, and how this relates to coral restoration and the blue economy, even though a lot of the waste management activity is in fact on land. And I think interesting for the audience to know why this is such an important sector when it relates to the blue economy.
Well, we saw waste as being the lowest hanging fruit in terms of return on investment, but also quick runs on the board for environment. So in Fiji, the majority of our waste solutions are not solutions, they're dumps, and they are usually on mangrove or on riverbanks. And they have no leachate control, they're not contained, they're not sanitary. So we have done some scientific analysis of one of the largest coastal dumps, and that is actually the most degraded part of the reef. So that we saw that if we could bring in some solutions, which more or less we've developed on our own, which was quite an interesting process, because we're not waste experts, but we have partnered with a waste expert on this. But we just saw that as being a quick return. We definitely are facing challenges. There's backlash here towards sanitary landfills. We've always seen this as a basic building block, but more advanced solutions are what people are looking for. But we have to weigh up things like cost versus government subsidy. So we're really just trying to focus on quick quick solutions. We're also working with upcycling and recycling opportunities. So there's actually there's very little recycling that happens in Fiji. So one of our companies is a fertilizer startup. So it's actually a spin-off company for Fiji's largest liquid waste management company. So they're looking at diverting all of the green waste and the manure waste currently going into landfill and then turning that into a fertilizer, a non-synthetic fertilizer, which can then be used with coastal farmers in, say, sugarcane or rice farming. The idea there is that if these farmers are not using chemicals, they will provide a buffer between the farmers who are using chemicals and the waterways and the coast, because the chemical runoff and also the siltation and the sediment running off from the land is one of the major causes of reef degradation. One other company just to mention is a recycling company. So this company has been in business for 25 years in Fiji. They have been breaking even. They do it out of the goodness of their heart and out of a passion, but they've generally been misunderstood. So I think that's an experience that I think is really important to convey. Things like recycling, it's a real luxury here. People don't recycle here. It's not something people think of. So to bring in these sorts of concepts, you're having to work with, quite large-scale awareness programs as well. So this company, and just to kind of speak to your question about challenges, so this company, we're almost thinking, can we even go on doing this anymore? We don't feel like we're getting anywhere. But when we were able to step in and support them, they said, well, this is the first time in 25 years we've been able to think about what else our business could be. And so they now have this kind of renewed energy and renewed vigor about how they could actually become a model, not just for Fiji, but for the region. So, so to be able to support in that way has been one of the great privileges of what we're doing.
Fantastic, Jodi. So, Simon, a question for you. You have a particular mandate in your fund, and you have a particular return hurdle. You have investors in your fund that have particular requirements. If a business wants to come to you that's operating in the blue economy and is looking for finance, what do you need to tell them in terms of what your fund can and can't do?
Yeah, so look, we are like any other fund, right? So the important piece is we need an investable business model. We need to see a business model that makes sense. We need to see engaged stakeholders, engaged management team. I think that I have an old adage that you can't be green or blue if you're in the red. So for a sustainable type of model, you need to have the ability to make an economic return out of that, and that reinforces the impact and the environmental return that we get out of any investment. But I think we shouldn't, the difficulties there, but I mean, most of what we do today out of the Sustainable Ocean Fund is actually investing on land. So everybody says, how can you do an ocean fund, invest in the water? How do you do that? And the reality is that if I'm looking at an investment into fisheries, generally it's in the supply chain. So I'm basically making an investment into processing or the cold chain or the supply chain, and that directly filters through to the small-scale fishermen and improves their living wages and their livelihoods. And it's the same. We talked about plastics. 80% of plastics actually comes from on land. So ocean-bound plastic, 80% of ocean-bound plastic comes from the shore. And so, we are looking at businesses that are on land. We're looking at businesses with a proper investable type of business plan. And then, we have a dedicated pool of capital. So we have a higher, appetite for risk in this sector. So, we are looking and we're creating a specialist type of knowledge in the business. And so we have that ability to, take more risk around these types of businesses in emerging market regions. So that's what we're looking to do.
Fantastic. Daniela, you running the program Blue Invest, and as far as companies in the European member states are concerned, what advice can you give them based on your experience and running of this program in terms of seeking finance in the member states?
Yeah, no, that's the $1 million question actually, because they are looking for investment, and there are many ways to do that. And what's the type of investment that's right for them? I think if they're looking for grants, the European Union, the European Commission has a lot of programs, as you know well, Horizon 2020, European Innovation Council, and other. You have also the Maritime Fund, the Maritime MFF, which is a fund. So that grants are there, but we don't know for how long. The question is, are the grants going to continue financing up to 2.5 million? Perhaps the grants will be there for much earlier stage and lower tickets as well. So apart from grants, when you're looking more of a private equity investment, then that's where we see the problems. So companies, sometimes they need entrepreneurial skills, because what we see is we have a lot of scientists with brilliant ideas, they know their products extremely well, but then when it comes to getting that technology to the market, to get some traction and say, oh, okay, actually we can make money with this, and therefore an investor would also be willing to support them, is where you see a lot of gaps. So what we are doing with this program is providing coaching actually for free for companies. So at the end of the program, we will have coached 200 SMEs for 10 days, wow, in market access or investment issues. But so the market traction is one point, and the other is the proposition for investors. They need an investment to grow the business. What they're gonna do with the money? How they're gonna go, and how they're gonna bring some return. So it's not there is not a formulaic way to say, okay, that's what you do. You get the investment and you're sorted. But it's rather a process where we analyze their needs, we analyze their readiness to then do a plan with them and try to fill the gaps that the investors are looking for. What helps is the fact we are in touch with both with the investors and the companies. So we're in the middle here. We understand what the investors are looking for, and what we hear from investors is, I have money, I don't have good projects. And then we have the SMEs, which at the same time they're saying, well, there is no money. And then we tell them, well, actually there is, but the point is we need to make you more professional. We need to make you more attractive to make sure this goes. What's great is the fact the trend to invest in sustainability is growing. We are seeing a lot of blue specialized funds going on the market now in a very kind of with the mandate only on the blue economy, like Simon's Fund, for example. Which is great. And then you have government support. You have EIB financing just green transition. So, but they need to up the game. I think that's the main thing for SMEs.
Of course, Jodi, I'm going to give you the last word before a very, very quick wrap up. Just very quickly, in 30 seconds, what advice can you give developers who are starting the journey that you started a few years ago in terms of developing prospects for the blue economy? Any particular points or learnings that you've had over the last couple of years that might help other developers in other regions?
I think being prepared to get really down and dirty, to really become quite close with the entrepreneurs that you're working with, because you really do need to form a bond. There's a lot of trust that's needed. So I think that's my main advice.
Okay, thank you. Well, I wanted to thank all of the panelists. I'm just going to end off now with a brief word on blended finance and how the UNCDF is using this in emerging markets. So one of the platforms that the UNCDF uses is the Least Developed Country Investment Platform. And we set this up some time ago as a concessional but commercially priced lending and guarantee platform for SMEs around the world to benefit from having a partner that can do some of the work in assisting in assessing, monitoring and developing projects in not only the blue economy, but generally in things like energy and fintech around the world, by providing a slice of capital that allows private sector investors then to have the risk that they might not be willing to take taken away, but also in some cases, because this is a commercial financial instrument, a loan in most cases, it's sometimes priced at a much lower than commercial rate, which allows then the total cash flow of the business to service a commercial loan or commercial financing, which will be at a commercial rate. So in the case that the blue economy needs to develop, you're always going to have in the early stages of these businesses some requirement for some concessional capital or development capital. Now, sometimes in very, very active markets like the US, this is provided by private investors because there's a very, very active market for that sort of private investment. In other regions, there's not such an active investment market. In the EU, for example, it's very disaggregated because of the member states, different languages, different cultures, different economies, and so forth. And that's why the EU and European Commission has so many facilities to do that. But in other smaller economies, you don't have that. And that's where the UNCDF and other players can come in. So if you are a project developer and you are in one of the regions that the UNCDF operates in, please make contact with the local country office, and no doubt the UNCDF could have a look at your proposition. On top of that, I just wanted to say thank you to the panelists. The blue economy is increasingly important investment sector, is at a very early stage, but everyone is doing what they can to develop the sector, and we're learning as we go along. So thank you for elucidating us on what has been done. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Daniela. Thank you, Jodi. And this is where we end off. Thank you very much.